I'm sitting here now, staring at these old blue-painted walls. They've got the same vintage movie posters I tacked up when I was just a kid, 13, to be exact. This basement room has always been my sanctuary, my little corner of the world where I could be myself without anyone else's opinions creeping in. Even when I was young, I felt like living down here gave me a kind of independence most kids my age didn't have. I decorated it how I wanted, never letting my folks' preferences seep in. Don't get me wrong, I'm religious. But I've never been the type to plaster crosses on every wall or fill every shelf with Bible verses. And let me tell you, I've definitely avoided hanging any of those portraits of Jesus staring off into the distance. Down here, I made the rules. It felt freeing back then. Now, though, it's starting to feel more like I'm trapped in a tomb. I'm writing this partly because I need to vent, get these anxieties out of my head before they eat me alive like some wild animal. But there's another part of me hoping that, by putting my thoughts on paper, I can make sense of the mess inside my mind. Who knows? Maybe it'll help me find some clarity in all this chaos. My parents, well, they're your textbook conservative Christians. The kind you'd see smiling in some political ad for family values. Growing up in their house was like living in a church bulletin. Sundays were the worst, though. 3-hour sermons every morning, led by this pastor who couldn't seem to keep his eyes above a certain level. I swear, if you ever caught my mom talking to him, you'd think she had a third eye somewhere on her chest by the way his gaze lingered. Most of my childhood blurs together in memories of endless Sunday school lessons, Bible studies, and more prayers than I can count. Even now, if someone sets a plate of food in front of me, my hands automatically clasp together like I'm about to say grace. It's pure muscle memory at this point. Not that I've had much food to bless lately. Things started to change when I hit 16. That's when I really began to feel fed up with the whole routine. I'd scroll through social media and see my friends out at the beach on Sundays, soaking up the sun in swimsuits my mom would have fainted over. If she ever saw me in something like that, she'd probably call in an exorcist right on the spot. For months, I tried to keep my annoyance under wraps, but it must have shown in the way I rolled my eyes during sermons or gave those quick, half-hearted amens at the end of prayers. Eventually, my mom noticed. One Sunday afternoon, she finally had enough and decided to confront me about it. One night, a few months ago, my mom came into my room without so much as a knock. Her face had that serious, almost sorrowful look she gets when she's about to ask something heavy. "Are you questioning your faith?" she asked, standing there like a judge ready to hand down a verdict. I tried to play it cool, though my insides were churning. "No, Mom. I still believe in him. I just don't get why I can't have faith and still do the stuff my friends do." I kept my tone as calm as I could, even though I wasn't being completely honest. She sat down at the end of my bed, her hands folded like she was about to lead a prayer. "Honey, on the day of judgment, we all have to face our sins and repent for the mistakes we made on earth. It's a fallen world, you know. Ever since the serpent deceived Eve in the garden, we've had to learn to live with the burden of sin." And just like that, I knew I was trapped in another one of her lectures. It was like she had a button she could press to launch into a full-blown sermon. I needed an escape, fast. "You're absolutely right, Mom," I said, reaching out to place my hand on hers. She seemed to relax a little at that. I guess I was just letting temptation get the better of me. But don't worry, I won't let it happen again. You can trust me. I even managed to pull off one of my best fake smiles, though it felt awkward plastered across my face. Her expression softened, and she smiled back at me. "I trust you, sweetheart. You know, I was young once too, believe it or not." She giggled, leaning over to kiss me on the forehead before standing up. "Good night, darling," she said, heading toward the door. "Good night, Mom," I replied, watching her leave. The second the door shut, I let out a long, silent sigh of relief. For the next few weeks, I kept my head down and did my best to act like everything was fine. I'd smile politely at that creepy pastor during Sunday service, though every time he spoke, it felt like my mind was drifting further away. Week by week, I could feel my faith slipping through my fingers like sand. It wasn't just the sermons, it was the nagging thought that maybe my parents' faith wasn't about God at all. Maybe it was just another way to tighten their grip on my life. Then, last week, I finally hit my breaking point. It was a Sunday night, and my friends had texted me about hanging out at someone's place to smoke weed and chill. Sundays were a strict no-go for me. My parents treated them like sacred lockdown days, completely reserved for family time and prayer. There was no way I'd ever be allowed out of the house, not even to see friends. But living in the basement had its perks. My window, for one, had an old screen door covering it that could be popped out pretty easily. So, around 11 p.m., after I was sure my parents were fast asleep, I made my move. I grabbed my jacket, quietly pried the screen loose, and slipped out into the cool night air. My heart was pounding like a drum as I bolted toward the alley behind our house, where my friend's car was waiting for me with the engine running. It felt like I was breaking free, even if just for a few hours. "Hey there, choir girl," Ashley called out as I dove into the back seat of her car like I was making a getaway after robbing a bank. "Just drive. Get me the hell out of here," I hissed, tapping her shoulder over and over like my life depended on it. Ashley laughed, but she didn't waste any time. The car roared to life, and we sped off into the night. My pulse was still racing when we finally pulled up in front of Megan's house. Ashley shifted into park, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a small baggie. Inside was a joint, neatly rolled and ready to go. "If I'm gonna survive being in the same room as Josh now that he and Megan are a thing, I'm gonna need this," she muttered, digging around for her lighter. She flicked it a few times until a flame finally caught, then lit the joint, took a long drag, and exhaled slowly. She held it out toward me. "Here, take a hit." I froze for a moment, staring at the joint like it was some kind of alien artifact. I'd never smoked anything before, not even a cigarette. The smell was sharp and earthy, and it made my stomach do a little flip. My first instinct was to say no. "No thanks," I said, waving my hand to emphasize the point. Ashley just shrugged, bringing it back to her lips. "Suit yourself," she said, blowing out a lazy stream of smoke. She finished the joint as we sat there chatting about nothing in particular. The air in the car got hazier by the minute, and I cracked the window a little just to breathe. Finally, after a lull in the conversation, Ashley turned to me with that mischievous grin of hers. "Your parents still running their dictatorship?" she asked, leaning her head back against the seat. "Yeah," I sighed, rolling my eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. The older I get, the more convinced they are that anytime I'm out with friends, I'm either worshipping Satan or hooking up with every guy in town. Ashley snorted. "I mean, not on Sundays at least," she said, cracking up at her own joke. Her laugh was contagious, and before I knew it, I was laughing right along with her. The kind of laugh that leaves you gasping for air, your sides aching. When the giggles finally died down, my eyes wandered to the little nub of the joint still burning between her fingers. "You know what?" I said, reaching out my hand before I could think twice. "I'm dead if I get caught anyway, so what's the difference?" Ashley's eyes lit up. "Look at you, choir girl," she said, passing me the joint with a proud grin. "Go on, you can finish it." My treat. I held it for a second, feeling the warmth of it against my fingers. My heart was pounding again, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was something else. Curiosity, maybe? Or rebellion? Whatever it was, I raised the joint to my lips, took a cautious puff, and tried not to cough my lungs out. Ashley cheered me on, clapping like I'd just won some kind of award. "That's my girl," she said, laughing so hard she nearly spilled the rest of her baggie. It wasn't what I expected. It burned a little and tasted weird, but for the first time in forever, I felt like I was doing something that was entirely my choice. It felt free. I took one puff of that joint, and it felt like I'd inhaled a live ember straight into my lungs. My throat burned like it was on fire, and I couldn't stop coughing. Tears streamed down my face, and I gasped for air like a man drowning in deep water. Ashley burst out laughing, shaking her head. "Don't worry," she said through her chuckles. "You won't have virgin lungs forever." I eventually managed to hack my way through the rest of the joint, though I wasn't sure how. Afterward, we went inside Megan's house. Most of the night is a blur now. I remember slumping on the couch, feeling like a heavy blanket was draped over me, even though I was only wearing my hoodie and leggings. My body felt leaden, my thoughts slow, and the world around me seemed to hum with a strange, distant rhythm. By the time Ashley dropped me off, she parked a block away from my house to avoid any late-night parental detection. I climbed out of the car, frantically sniffing at my hoodie, my hair, my hands, every part of me, trying to make sure I didn't reek of weed. It was like I could almost see the smell clinging to me, even though Ashley swore it had stayed in the car. When I rounded the corner and saw the living room light still on in my house, my stomach dropped like a stone. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might leap out of my chest. I froze, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk for what felt like an eternity, trying to figure out what to do. Should I wait them out? Make up a story? Or maybe I could sneak back in through my basement window and hope they wouldn't notice. After running through a dozen terrible ideas, I decided to go with the window. As I crept into the backyard, I caught a glimpse of the living room through the curtains. My dad was pacing in his pajamas, phone in hand, rubbing the back of his neck like he was trying to knead out the stress. My mom sat hunched on the couch, tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. The sight of them hit me like a gut punch. Whatever anger they'd feel when they caught me, this wasn't just about rules. I genuinely hurt them. I slipped back through the window as quietly as I could, my heart racing the whole time. Once I was back inside, I crawled into bed, still fully dressed, and waited. Would they come storming down the stairs to yell at me? Or maybe they'd wait until morning to unleash the lecture of a lifetime. But as the minutes ticked by and nothing happened, I felt myself drifting off to sleep. The next thing I knew, morning light was streaming through my window. Everything had been quiet during the night, no shouting, no slamming doors, nothing unusual. But when I sat up and looked toward the staircase, my heart stopped. The stairs were gone. The door that led to the living room, the only way out of my basement other than the window, wasn't there anymore. In its place was just flat, smooth hardwood, blending seamlessly with the rest of the floor. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stared again, but it didn't change. The only thought racing through my mind was, what the hell is going on? I shot out of bed like I'd been jolted by lightning and ran straight to where the staircase used to be. What I found was nothing but solid hardwood flooring, flat and seamless. My mind raced, trying to grasp what I was seeing. How the hell do stairs just disappear? My thoughts spun like a tornado. How could this happen overnight? And how didn't I wake up while it was happening? That's when the panic hit me like a freight train. My chest tightened, and it felt like I was being crushed under the weight of something massive. Every breath was a struggle, shallow and sharp. I was trapped, and it was like the walls were closing in on me. Then it hit me, my window. Without even thinking, I leapt back onto my bed, reaching for it with every ounce of strength I had. I gripped the frame, pulling and yanking, but it didn't move. Not an inch. My heart sank as I leaned in closer and realized, with a horror I can still feel in my bones, that the edges of the window were welded shut. Desperation took over. I grabbed anything within arm's reach, a lamp, a picture frame, even a pile of books, and hurled them at the glass. Nothing, not even a scratch. My panic grew with every failed attempt until I grabbed my wooden nightstand, hoisted it above my head, and smashed it against the window with all the strength I could muster. The glass didn't even crack. I kept going, over and over, pouring every bit of energy I had into breaking that window, until my arms felt like they'd been wrung dry. Eventually, my legs gave out, and I crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. My body was shaking, my muscles aching. All I could do now was scream. "Moem. Dad." I shouted at the top of my lungs, my voice tearing with every word. "Help me. I'm trapped." I screamed until my throat felt raw, tears streaming down my face, hot and relentless. It was like a hurricane inside me, waves of fear and helplessness crashing down again and again. But no one answered. No footsteps came toward me. No voices called back. The house stayed eerily quiet, and the only sound was my own ragged breathing. When I finally stopped screaming, I looked around for my phone. I snatched it off my nightstand and frantically checked for a signal. Nothing. No bars, no Wi-Fi. No way to reach anyone. The TV was still there, along with my dad's old collection of classic DVDs. But what good was that now? There was no food down here. The only water source was the tiny sink in the bathroom attached to my room. My mind raced, trying to calculate how long I could survive on just that. Hours dragged by as I paced back and forth, occasionally screaming for help again, my voice growing weaker each time. Then, as I was staring blankly at the window, something moved outside. A figure. My heart leapt. I rushed to the glass, pressing my face against it to get a better look. It was my mom. She was sitting on one of the backyard chairs, her posture slumped, her hands limp in her lap. Her face was swollen and puffy, her eyes bloodshot and hollow, like she'd been crying for hours. She wasn't moving, just staring off into the distance with a look that made my stomach twist. I started pounding on the glass with both fists, frantic and wild. "Moem. Moem, I'm in here." I screamed, my voice cracking with desperation. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look in my direction. I banged harder, the sound echoing in the small room like thunder. My hands stung from the force, but I didn't care. "Moem, please. I'm trapped." I shouted until my voice gave out entirely. But still, she didn't turn. She just sat there, frozen in place, her gaze fixed on some far-off point I couldn't see. And that's when a new kind of terror crept in, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your stomach churn. It wasn't just that she couldn't hear me. It was like, she didn't even know I was there. "Moem. I'm here. Please let me out." I screamed until my throat felt like sandpaper, pounding on the window with fists that were already sore and red. But she didn't move, not even the slightest flinch. She just sat there like a statue, staring into the void. What the hell is happening? My mind spiraled into chaos. Is she ignoring me? Can she seriously not hear me? There was no way, absolutely no way, she couldn't hear me. I was shouting at the top of my lungs, and these windows weren't even that thick. And then, another thought crept in, darker and colder than the rest. Did they do this to me? My mom's tears, her hollowed-out expression, was that guilt? Was that why she was crying? The idea hit me like a slap across the face. What kind of twisted parents would trap their own daughter down here? I stumbled back from the window and collapsed onto my bed, my mind a swirling mess of anger, fear, and confusion. The questions kept racing through my head, an endless loop I couldn't escape. Why would they do this? How could they do this? What did I do that was so unforgivable? As the day dragged on, the shadows outside began to stretch longer, creeping across the walls of my room. Night eventually fell, and I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, trying to will myself to believe this was all just a horrible nightmare. Maybe if I go to sleep, I'll wake up and everything will be normal again. The stairs will be back and they'll have made their point. I won't ever sneak out or touch weed again, just let me out of here. But when I woke up the next morning, my nightmare hadn't ended. The stairs were still gone. I climbed out of bed and shuffled over to the window again, my heart heavy with a dread I could hardly bear. Outside, nothing had changed. The same old patio furniture sat in the backyard, weathered and worn, the same set we'd had since I was a little kid. Not a soul was out there, no mom, no dad, no one. Just an empty yard and a sky that looked far too bright for how dark I felt inside. That's when I noticed something strange. I glanced down at the clocks in my room, the one on my nightstand, the one on the wall, even the digital one on my phone. They had all stopped. Each one frozen in time, the glowing numbers on my phone locked at 3:33 a.m. It felt like the world itself had come to a halt. From that moment on, the only way I could tell time was by watching the sun rise and fall outside my window. No ticking, no talking, just the relentless silence of my prison. Desperation clawed at me again, and I tried screaming. I screamed until my voice cracked, screamed until my vocal cords felt like frayed wires ready to snap. But no one came. No footsteps on the floor above me, no faint voices through the walls. Just me and the echo of my own panic. I'll never forget that feeling, the sheer terror of realizing I was truly alone. It was like crawling out of a car crash, disoriented and trembling, trying to piece together what had just happened, only to find the world around me unrecognizable. But it wasn't just the silence or the emptiness. Something about that blank wall, the space where my stairs used to be, felt wrong. I can't even describe it properly, but every time I looked at it, it was like it stared back at me. An oppressive, looming presence that felt like it was sitting at the edge of my bed, watching me. That fear quickly morphed into something else, a blinding, white-hot rage. My parents had done this. They had to have. I didn't know how, but I couldn't think of any other explanation. The thought of their smug, self-righteous faces sent my blood boiling. Fueled by anger and desperation, I grabbed the battered nightstand I'd already thrown at the window and hurled it as hard as I could at the wall where my door used to be. The sound of the wood splintering echoed in the room, loud and sharp, but it didn't make a dent. The wall stood there, as solid and unyielding as ever, taunting me with its emptiness. Over and over, I swung the shattered remnants of the nightstand against the wall. Each blow echoed through the room, the sound bouncing back at me like a cruel reminder of my futility. With every strike, the wood splintered into smaller, more useless fragments, while the wall stood unscathed, not even a chip in the paint to show for my effort. Desperation turned to exhaustion, and I found myself dragging my dresser over to that empty, mocking space where the stairs used to be. I used every ounce of strength I had left, slamming the scattered wooden pieces into the wall, hoping, praying for some kind of crack, some kind of proof that I could escape this hell. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. Finally, I collapsed onto the floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My arms hung limp at my sides, trembling from the effort. And there I sat, staring at the wall that refused to yield, feeling the weight of my hopelessness settle over me like a suffocating blanket. This was the room I'd once thought of as my sanctuary, my private escape from the chaos of the world. Now it was nothing more than a prison cell, designed to break me in ways I didn't yet understand. The rest of that day blurred together. I gave up fighting and lay in bed, numbly staring at the screen as old DVDs from my shelf flickered in front of me. Scenes of classic movies I used to love played on, but I barely registered them. The dialogue and music were just noise, white noise to drown out the silence that pressed down on me from all sides. When I woke the next morning, if it even was the next morning, I dragged myself to the window. That became my routine, staring out at the world I was no longer a part of. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point, I realized something horrifying. It was fall now. When I first became trapped, it had been the middle of summer. The days were long, the sun blazing high in the sky. But now the trees outside were crowned with orange and red leaves, the ground littered with crisp reminders of a season I'd never gotten to experience. How had it fast-forwarded 2 months in what felt like a single night? My only sense of time came from watching the daylight outside my window, but it had betrayed me. Days seemed to vanish like smoke, slipping through my fingers every time I blinked. Had I really been trapped down here that long? Or was time itself playing tricks on me, stretching and bending in ways I couldn't comprehend? But then again, did it even matter? What kind of life was this anyway? I wasn't living, I was just surviving. A rat in a cage, locked away and forgotten, experimented on by some cruel and demented force I couldn't understand. From where I sit now, writing this, I've counted 25,430 sunsets. That's how long I've been down here, or at least, that's my best guess. I didn't start keeping track right away, too consumed by panic and denial. But since I began tallying the days, the seasons outside my window have changed more times than I can count. Here's the thing, though, I'm not hungry. I'm not thirsty. My body doesn't ache from malnutrition or dehydration. Somehow, I just exist. Day after day, the world outside moves on, while I remain frozen in time. And the people outside my window, they're strangers now. The faces I once knew, my neighbors and classmates, they're all gone. My parents, they're gone too. They died years ago, though for me, it feels like it was only yesterday. I saw their funerals from this very spot, peering through the glass, unable to do anything but watch. I don't even know who lives in my house anymore. I've seen them, of course, new families, new faces coming and going over the years. They sit on the patio, laughing and talking, completely unaware that beneath their feet, a girl has been trapped for over 6 decades. In the beginning, I tried everything. I screamed until my voice was raw, cried until my eyes ran dry. I prayed, too. I prayed with every ounce of faith I had left. But the only answer I ever got was silence. And then it hit me. If there is a God, then he must be the one keeping me here. My prayers weren't going to some benevolent savior. They were going to my tormentor. I don't pray anymore. Now I sit in the quiet, staring at that same damn wall, counting the days that slip through my fingers. The only sign of my attempts to escape is a single chip in the paint, no bigger than my fingernail. I don't know why I'm still here or what I did to deserve this. But I do know one thing: if God exists, he's forgotten me.